where it threatens to hijack your nervous system, to one where you draw untold energy from it is a powerful tool, one that smashes through the compression of the switch. It's called emotional alchemy. Exercise. Things unsaid. Maybe you find yourself constantly losing your temper over the small stuff. Maybe you feel like you're wrapped in the layers, get caught not feeling much at all. The human experience is full of ecstasy, anger, sadness, doubt. It's time for us to harness the emotions a good girl is not supposed to have. It's time to say some of your things unsaid. These are the statements that rose up in your body or got stuck before they made it out into words. Whether you chose not to say them or couldn't, this is the place to empty that reservoir. The topics we are least willing to talk about are what get stuck and the cause of our biggest problems. You will not have to say these things, you just need to know what they are. Write the following phrase at the top of a piece of paper. I never told blank about blank. Keep going until you fill the page. Don't censor yourself, and include the big stuff as well as the small. There are a couple variations on this exercise that may also be helpful to you. Do things unsaid, but for one person. Your ex-husband, your coworker, your mom. Do things unsaid every day for a month. I tried this as an experiment with a class that had a lot of pent-up, unreleased feeling, and it was a revelation for students to realize how many times in the course of an ordinary day they silenced their feeling. By the end of the month, we discovered that doing this exercise for 5 minutes in the morning entirely changed how they moved through the world. Do things unsaid as a partner exercise. This may actually be the optimal way to do this exercise. Indeed, many of the exercises in this book are best done in groups. Here's how it works. You say, I haven't told blank that blank. Your partner does not coach or give advice or try to fix the problem. She says, thank you. What else haven't you said? After 5 minutes, you switch. Saying these words out loud to another person is one of the best ways to alchemize the anger and to mitigate the haze of pain that tends to accompany the process. There is a very good reason that every religion has a form of the confession. It is a primal human need to be heard, and for someone outside of us to bear witness with neutrality. Please do not use this exercise to beat yourself up over the things you didn't say. Do not use any exercise in this book as self-tap. Your things unsaid list is a victory and should be celebrated as such. Awareness brings choice, which brings freedom. In a book about radical change, it may seem counterintuitive to be told to do nothing, and yet that is exactly what you should do with your things unsaid. Simply by writing this list and returning to update it periodically, you're already doing something. Now, allow yourself the great gift of watching everything your awareness and attention can make happen. Invisible labor revealed. Your things unsaid list could probably also be titled Things a Good Girl Wouldn't Say. And while you were listing yours, you may have noticed that all this silence also leads to a tremendous amount of hidden work. Instead of saying, you're an alcoholic and you need to leave my dinner party right now, the good girl makes 1,000 accommodations. She'll rearrange the seating, leave an extra glass of water by the drunkard's elbow, and brightly ask, who wants dessert? After one of his sloppy rants. Then, quietly call to apologize to her guests the next day. Instead of asking her husband, do you mind being the primary wage earner while I stay at home with the kids? The good girl compensates for her guilt by doing his company's bookkeeping, scouting for potential customers in her own social network, placating his most difficult clients, and bringing lunch to his staff, all without receiving a paycheck. Instead of asking her colleague, do you want to cut this shit out, or would you prefer we take this to human resources? The good girl invests in a wardrobe that doesn't show an inch of skin, finesses travel arrangements so she'll never have to be alone with him, then, secretly, starts looking for another job. Not all invisible labor arises from things unsaid, but invisible labor is a tremendous source of rage for women. Rage that, most of the time, doesn't even get to the surface. One of the most surefire ways I have to rile up a class is to ask them to think of everything they do that they don't get directly credited, acknowledged, or compensated for. Everything they do in their lives that isn't seen, that's taken for granted, that's not paid income. It's astonishing The amount of time most women spend trying to prevent other people from making a mess, guessing at what other people are feeling, or comforting them after they've delivered a necessary correction. Just as with hidden speech, all this invisible labor can turn dancing. If you were a first responder, the kind of person who responds immediately to a crisis, then you train the people around you to reach out the moment they have a problem. And in no time at all, you're surrounded by people who need you, not feed you. For some of us, this invisible labor makes up 80% of our work. No wonder we're exhausted all the time. No wonder we have no energy for our own passion projects, or even to think about what those might be. Invisible labor can also be incredibly beautiful. I'm not trying to tell you that you cannot stay late to tutor a student who's falling behind, pick up litter on your beach walk, or connect a friend who's starting a business with an investor who can make her dream happen. But awareness of what it is you're doing, especially if your good girl autoresponder is jumping in before you've been asked to do anything at all, is critical. Because with awareness comes choice. Exercise. Think of all the things you do that are outside the scope of your actual paid work, especially the things you do without even being asked, either because they're expected or because your responsiveness to a need is so heartfelt and fast that you nurture or help someone before they even have a chance to formulate a request. Does your partner think the laundry does itself? Are your colleagues more careless than they should be because they know you'll catch their mistakes? Who plans the gallery opening, then runs out to buy the wine? Who decorates the house for the holidays? Who found the marriage counselor? Who booked the appointment? Just today, what did you think about? What did you do? Where did the bulk of your mental, physical, and emotional energy go? How much of what you did and thought and worried about was for you? And how much of it was for someone else? How much of it is something that you can expect to be reciprocated without needing to ask? How much of it would you like to be reciprocated, even though you haven't asked? How much of it was credited, and how much of it stayed unseen? How much of it remained invisible, even to the person who benefited the most? When you start seeing this labor as the labor it is, you can start making choices about whether or not you want to do it. What's working for you, and what isn't. Simply recognizing how much invisible labor you do can be incredibly liberating in and of itself. But once you start becoming aware of this invisible labor as a choice you are making, then the people around you start to see it too. And when you start acknowledging all the invisible labor you do and giving yourself credit for it, even when others don't, it gets easier to ask anybody for anything at any time. If you are the kind of person who doesn't feel you have the right to ask for anything, that will start to shift when you begin seeing the work you do as work, as opposed to the tax that you pay for just being female on the planet. The skills to ask will come in a later chapter, but for now, treasure this newfound awareness and celebrate every time you notice yourself embarking on an act of invisible labor, and every time you choose whether or not to do it. With each choice you make, that labor goes from being automatic performance to an intentional act of love, or the decision to prioritize yourself. Your book of desires will be a great ally as you start to negotiate the time and space that gets freed up when you make your invisible labor visible. Return to it, both to add items and as a source of inspiration. Exercise. Conversations I'm not having. You may be having a lot of big feelings by now. This is appropriate for the chaotic middle phase. In this swirl of emotions, it's totally logical that there will be themes and conversations emerging that you know you should have with the people in your life. Having those conversations is best done when you've reached a point of clarity. But note that now, the chaos of the middle phase is when they start making themselves known. Again, these are not conversations you will have to have. As with beginning to recognize invisible labor and the things unsaid exercise, we are first bringing these issues to our own attention and documenting them. Though, it often happens that students find these themes emerge organically after they do the exercise. When I have given you the tools you need to have these difficult conversations, you will get to decide whether to have them or not. For now, logging them is enough. Write the following sentence at the top of the page. I am not having a conversation with blank about blank. For example, I'm not having a conversation with my kid about how she never empties the dishwasher without being asked. I'm not having a conversation with my mother about my sister inheriting our childhood home. Create as many entries as you can. After you've finished your list, do a separate pass for conversations you're not having around money and conversations you're not having around sex. Locate, approve, influence. What feelings came up for you when you wrote your list of conversations I'm not having? Locate these feelings. Name them. Did you feel helplessness, hopelessness, fury, sadness, sickness, frustration, a desire for vengeance, glee, all of the above? Approve of whatever feelings came up. By approval, I don't mean accepting the emotion. I mean accepting the fact that it exists. Let's say one of the feelings that came up is a crappy one. Jealousy, for instance, or resentment. Approving of that feeling doesn't mean condoning it. It doesn't mean resigning yourself to the fact that it's never going to change. It simply means resigning yourself to the fact that what is happening right now. Pretending that something else is happening, telling yourself you feel grateful because you're sure, when in fact you feel really sad, is denial. When you disapprove of the existence of a feeling that comes up, you disconnect from it and have no influence on it. It's only when you acknowledge what's actually there that you stand a chance to say where the energy goes and why. That's influence. The magic word I use with myself is welcome. If I do a bad girl protocol and a homicidal maniac shows up, a Valkyrie who wants to take a bullwhip to most of Congress, I say, welcome. Pathetic, whining little girl who's overwhelmed and just wants someone to take it all off my plate so I can be alone and rest. Welcome. The good girl people pleaser who wants to say yes and impress and satisfy others, even though it means overextending myself. Welcome. Anxiety is unalchemized enthusiasm. Worry is unalchemized care. Sadness can signal a return to yourself and expose a desire for more of the tender things in life. Rage is unalchemized passion, absolutely a force for good if it wakes people up to the truth of the world. There is no such thing as a vice or a virtue, only the role you give it. You can work with anything that comes up, as long as it's not buried. Get in contact with an emotion and you can steer it, use it, suppress it, and it will run amok. Fighting against to fighting for. Conversations I'm not having invariably pulls back the curtain on the feelings you've been avoiding, and on some pretty juicy desires too. You likely didn't write, I'm not having a conversation with Susan about the rings of Saturn, because unless you're an astrophysicist with strong opinions about gaseous planets, there's no rage you're suppressing around that conversation, and no desire either. But when you look at your own list, I bet that every entry is a little undetonated bomb of both. Avoidance is a form of protection. We protect what's meaningful to us. So the conversations you're avoiding are filled with information about what's important to you, what's tender and painful and in need of protection. Use your conversations to create a few new entries in your book of desires, just as you mine your complaints for hidden desires. Investigate these conversations you're not having for longings. Include a few concrete and specific ways you would know that the desire had been manifested. Some of these will be straightforward. I would finally know exactly how much money we have in our joint savings account. But how would you know your dad respected you? What could he do that would give you that feeling? Approve also of the fact that you haven't yet had these conversations. Maybe you don't have enough information, or you're afraid, or you don't know how. The training you'll receive will move you through all the spaces and skills you will need to have these conversations. Logging them early is a fantastic benchmark. There will be lots of time to acknowledge and celebrate the process and the progress you're going to make. Moving through this arc, from numbness through rage, to a new clarity and energy around our desires, allows us to create transformation in ourselves and in the world. What comes next is accessing the kind of power that will make those conversations possible, and that protection unnecessary. This process of taking an unspoken, unacknowledged, suppressed emotion and shining light on it so it becomes acknowledged, located, and approved of is how we get from that chaotic middle phase to the final stage of clarity and power. Another way to think about this, we are moving from what we're fighting against to the thing we're fighting for. Desire is our link to what we care about, what we're willing to fight for. We cannot afford to forget the love that lives inside rage. You're not fighting against your roommate's messiness. You're fighting for a space that's beautiful and well cared for, where you can work on your photography, as well as for better communication with the person you live with. You're not fighting against the office bully, but for a workplace where everyone feels safe to brainstorm big. You're not fighting against sex trafficking, but for the recognition and protection of human rights of little girls around the world. Rage is everything you're fighting against the pins and needles phase of waking up a limb that's falling asleep. Complete the arc, and you'll see that rage was really a desire trying to make itself known, what you're fighting for. And we can use the clarity and energy we find in our rage to give us direction. It may seem dangerous to lean into our anger, but we don't get powerful by unplugging. We get powerful by tapping into the current. Connecting to our desire and acquiring the skills to get those desires met is what transforms that rage into power. It is a powerful thing to fight against police brutality, but it's even more powerful to fight for the sanctity of the lives of innocent men and women, and for a justice system that works equally well for all races. The dream of what that world would look like will move you, and whoever joins you in your crusade, much further than wanting to overcome police brutality will. Fighting against is the middle phase. We're taught to stop there, to smash our heads against the obstacle, to lock our attention onto what we don't want, instead of looking towards beyond the wall. But there's always going to be more juice in what you do want, what you're fighting for. And almost always, we find the desire we're fighting for is way bigger and more inspiring. Figuring out what we are fighting for changes our orientation. It angles us toward vision, not obstacle. The problem of what we're fighting against still gets tackled, but it does so while we're on our way to something bigger and better, our greatest, greediest dreams for ourselves and for humanity. Everything worth fighting for. Chapter 7. Solid as a rock. The power of legitimacy. A woman raised her hand after watching a demonstration I'd done with Ruben, co-founder of the Academy, and my verbal sparring partner in class. We'd staged a fight where his only job was to say no to me, no matter how convincing I am. I'm pretty sure I caved the second or third time he said no, she confessed. How do you hold the line? I asked her what she did for a living, and she told me that she was a nanny. So I asked, what would you say if a total stranger walked up to you in the park and said, I'm going to take this little boy you're taking care of for a walk, just the two of us, would that be okay? Absolutely not, she said, without a second's pause. I tried again. Maybe I'll just take him over there, behind the building with the bathrooms. Would that be okay? The class was laughing by that point at the outrageousness of the scenario, and she was too. Unless you were watching her body, which was locked and loaded. Her brain knew I was messing with her. Her body was poised to tear my throat out. My point is this. There was nothing that anyone on Earth could have said that would have convinced her to let some random stranger take that little boy out of her sight. Do you see how incredibly powerful that is? Now, imagine that she wasn't protecting the child in her care, but her dream of being a sculptor, or her organization's vision for housing justice. Imagine feeling so completely sure of the correctness of your conviction that there's no argument on Earth that can persuade you to dump that dream. That is how rock solid I want you to feel about your desires. This is legitimacy, the true superpower of a sub-state. The unshakable self-knowledge of a submissive state. What does legitimacy have to do with submission? In order to know exactly what you want and how you want it, you have to go inside. When you turn your attention inward and connect to what you want, exactly what it will taste and smell like, feel like, and what will change when you have it, then you give yourself permission to take it seriously. You need that permission to confess your desire, to express it, to expand it, and to communicate it to someone else with the full weight of your desire behind it. Women's conditioning, all the rules that tell us it's not okay to be dissatisfied or horny or hungry or mad, weakens our connection to desire. If we can't feel it fully, we can't transmit the richest vision, one we feel in our bodies and that the other person can feel in theirs. Most men don't so many women who knew that calm, how they dressed themselves in apology, how high and shallow their breathing was, how much tightness and compression they carried. Looking at her showed me the invisible restraints binding most of the women I knew. And looking at this nun's body, feeling it, I had no trouble at all believing the legend many people had told me about her. In the 1960s and 70s, the Communist Army destroyed many ancient temples and monasteries in China. But as the army gathered on the mountainside, preparing to storm her abbey, she appeared above them on a narrow outcropping. She just stood there. She didn't say a word. And the army turned tail and ran. This is what I mean by legitimacy. It is deeply rooted, it is embodied, and the truth it carries is completely unmovable. Asking for the right to ask at all. Asking with legitimacy for something doesn't necessarily mean you're convinced you're going to get it. But it does mean that you know, at a cellular level, that you have the right to ask for it. Good girl prohibitions against desire, against wanting, against asking, can muddy these waters. So it may sound like you're asking your boss for a promotion, but what you're really asking, and what your supervisor's animal body is responding to, is whether you're entitled to ask for one at all. Sometimes this even makes its way into the language we use. Can I ask you a question? I call these meta-asks. These meta-asks make it much more difficult for the other person to reply honestly, especially if they want to say no. Because they know, as you do, that saying no isn't just saying no to your request for a date or a promotion or a seat on the subway, but to the premise of your very existence. Not surprisingly, when someone does say no to you when you're in that state, even if they have a valid reason for doing so, it feels like they're annihilating you. And if they do say yes to avoid the discomfort of harming you, it's much more likely to be a false yes, an agreement they're going to waffle or pull back from as soon as your back is turned. Because these requests tend to be unsuccessful, either you don't get what you want, or you get what you want and nobody feels good about it, communicating this way creates a negative feedback loop, one that cannot help but continue to erode your confidence. After all, the person you're talking to isn't the only person affected by the energetics of the smush. Bracing for a no, qualifying your desires, relying about them. These broadcast weakness and doubt and confusion to your own nervous system as well as to the person you're talking to. Asking without legitimacy stirs up all of your worst fears. That you don't have the right to ask for what you asked for. That the person's going to say no. That everyone always says no. That you're alone and it's always going to be that way. By contrast, a congruent request creates connection, which in turn creates allies, and leads to intimacy and collaboration. A congruent ask feels good to both of you. Legitimacy even takes the sting out of it, because you're not relying on anyone else to confer validity on your request. The rejection of your invitation doesn't register as a failure. Instead, that no is transformed into a piece of relevant data, often a source of excitement, and one that leaves open the possibility of a longer conversation. Feeling legitimate about your desire is the first step toward confidence. Legitimacy is permission. Maybe you heard the words, "You have no say in what you want," and felt the truth of them on an intellectual level. And we can't get anywhere unless we're bringing our bodies along. Your brain doesn't need convincing. She's read all the books on empowerment, heard all the brilliant women give their TED Talks, and explain their theories on podcasts. Strengthening your legitimacy lets the rest of you know that it's okay to want what you want. This profoundly impacts how other people read you, even when you're not speaking. Think of a time you were incredibly stressed out. The number one gesture someone else could offer to change your channel is a hug. You love hugs, but you're so incredibly jangly and revved up that a hug is the very last thing they can imagine giving you. They might try it anyway. You might even ask for it. But to do so, they're going to have to push their own body to climb across some pretty scary vibes. This shows how energetics can work against us, and how legitimacy confers permission. It's the non-verbal permission other people need to give you what you want. And it gives you permission to want what you want. How many times have students told me that they were offered exactly what they wanted, and yet still found themselves saying no faster than they could catch themselves? Why on earth does that happen? We say no to the thing we most want,